I'm Bob Ferrara. I happen to be a member of the Acton 250 committee, along with some other distinguished folks in the back. But this isn't a 250 event. But it's kind of what's happening, and it references a lot of interesting American history that he has dug into. And my gosh, is it timely. It's also seems to resonate with some times that we're in, some very almost historic times. So Greg Jarboe is a longtime friend, been an Acton selectman years ago, now in the finance committee, now very active in the Acton Exchange, our new newspaper. There's a lot of other things I could say about him. He's got one story. Yes, and these fellows can say even more than me. But he's got a story. If you ever get a chance, find out what happened in the 1972 election in Lowell when the burglars, the White House burglars, came and did a little number in Lowell. Yeah, you had an inside track on it. And I was not far away, so I understand it very well. Yes, a little bit. But no, he's actually a bit of a journalist too. I should have mentioned that. Yeah. So anyway, Greg, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I know we haven't totally clarified what you just won with this bet, but we'll figure that out afterwards. Today, I think we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the publication of Common Sense. And I reference that I think it is because many, but not all, historians say that it was published on January 10th, 1776. But there are a couple of historians who said, oh, no, it was actually published on January 9th, 1776. And I want to open with that because I think it will frame the rest of the discussion. Now, the 9th and the 10th are close. So we're on the 250th anniversary, give or take 24 hours, right? Yeah. But what's the evidence for one version versus the other? And it turns out that on the 9th, there was an ad that was published in what was called the Pennsylvania Evening Post by the publisher of Common Sense, who said, hey, this new publication is now available, come to my bookstore and buy it. But most people count the 10th as the publication day because it was the first full day that the publication was available, not only at the bookstore that printed it and where it was sold, but also at other bookstores in Philadelphia, and taverns actually were selling pamphlets at that time too. And so the dispute quibbles over, do you count when the ad run and it was available in some places or general availability for a whole day? You know what? Give or take 24 hours. It's a good anniversary to celebrate, and we're going to do that today. Now, why are we doing this? Because it turns out this old historic document, whether you figure it was the 9th or the 10th, still resonates today. And it resonates so much that there was an article in today's New York Times about the 250th, and oh, by the way, the Times gave the 10th as the date of the, for what that's worth. Not that they're always right. But it also turns out that Chief Justice Roberts recently published his analysis of what the Supreme Court had done in 2025, and the whole first half of his analysis is a lead up to how Tom Paine's Common Sense set up the government that we are now, and it's kind of like, whoa, when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the New York Times agree, then you know something weird's going on. But it's one of the reasons why we want to celebrate today that something significant happened. And we can quibble over what it means to us today, but that's actually the beginning of a really important conversation. Now, why is this considered a big deal? It's because before this publication, 9th, 10th, you pick it. We were fighting for the rights of Englishmen. We thought we were still part of a family. The king was our parent, and we were quarreling children, and, excuse me? And we had this funny, the Second Continental Congress got together in Philadelphia, and in July of 1775, not the July a year later, we'll get there, they passed what is called the olive branch petition, and they say, look, King, fix this stuff with the taxes, and we'll pay no attention to what happened at Lexington and Concord. That's what we were fighting for? Taxes? Okay, well, that's one point of view. Even George Washington, at the time, 1775, said, oh, this idea of independence, oh, it's wicked. That was the consensus. That was the prevailing opinion back then. And then something weird happened. And that something weird is a guy named Thomas Paine, and his name is spelled Paine, except if you look it up in England, and the E got added somewhere along the way. And I don't know how many of you can find your ancestry somehow or other they spell it different. Yeah, okay, fine. So by the time he got here, he'd gained the extra E at the end of his name. That's fine. But he was the least likely person to change everybody's opinion. I mean, he wasn't born in an important place. He didn't go to school. Well, he did go to school, but by the way, he ended his schooling at age 13. So he didn't benefit from what education is supposed to provide you. We won't get into that debate. His businesses collapsed. He tried twice to be a tax collector. He actually had to chase down people who hadn't paid their taxes, which at that point in time was actually pretty adventurous as a job description, and got fired, partly because he wrote, how dare you, a petition to Parliament saying we're underpaid. We deserve more. If you don't pay us more, you're going to incent people to be corrupt. Oh yeah, definitely got to fire that kind of guy. His first wife died in childbirth. His second wife left him after his business failed, so I won't get into that. And at age 37, he's not a man about town. But the town he's in happens to be London, and the guy he runs into happens to be a fellow named Benjamin Franklin, who said, we could use somebody like you over in the colonies. I'll write you 2 letters of introduction, and you go to Philadelphia and you'll find a job. And he did. And they decided that this guy without a college education was still a good enough writer that he got this gig as the editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine. And he starts writing articles like, about African slavery in America, and he calls it, oh, by the way, that's an outrage. Oh, yeah, he's not shy. He's not shy. So people notice this guy's got talent. Now, what's fascinating is if you read some of the old issues of Pennsylvania Magazine, he often will write multiple articles for the same issue under different bylines to look like he had a staff. And I mention that today because there are a couple of folks here from the Acton Exchange, and we know how that feels. Now, this says 47 pages. have a book here that I can really recommend that you all read that says the original version of Tom Paine's Common Sense was 46 pages. And now I'm going to tell you a personal story. In 1969, I was a student at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I got assigned to, believe it or not, teach the course in my course. A very strange educational approach. But anyhow, you're a colonist. You teach the course on common sense. And so I had to go to the library to do my homework, right? In the library, the librarian said, oh, we have an original version that was donated by Andrew Carnegie. Would you, if you put on the white gloves, we'll let you read it. And the document I read to prepare for a class of very quizzical students was not 46 pages long. It was not 47 pages long. And if you think about it, it's impossible to have a 47-page thing, right? It was 48 pages long. And so I look at this debate, 46, 47, 48. This is another one of the interesting quibbles of history. What's going on here? Well, it turns out it was 46 pages of content that Tom Paine wrote. It was a seventh extra page for the title that the publisher wrote, not Tom Paine. And Tom Paine had some disagreements with the publisher, which is why the publisher only printed the first 2 editions, and Paine pulled his pamphlet and went to other publishers for the third and beyond. And oh, by the way, they didn't count blank pages. And some of the later publishers who published like the 3rd edition took the blank page and went, blank page, that's pretty useless, let's sell an ad. And so depending on which version that you read, you'll either see some ads or you won't see some ads, you'll see some blank pages. But the point is, whether you quibble over 46, 47, 48, what we're going to focus on are the 46 pages of content, because that's what changed America. And what's fascinating is when the publisher, a fellow named Bell, Robert Bell, put out the first 2 editions, he was a little worried about naming Thomas Paine as the author, A, because the only people who might know him from the magazine. Let's not put that business at risk. But also because this could be treason. So he identified the author as an Englishman. And so one of the things that collectors, by the way, if you ever decide you're going to invest a lot of money in buying an original version of Common Sense, if you see Thomas Paine's name on the cover, it's a 3rd edition, a 4th edition, a 5th edition. It's not one of the original 2. The original 2 are written by an Englishman. And oh, by the way, the title wasn't supposed to be Common Sense. It was going to be Plain Truth. But Paine ran his early versions by 2 guys named Ben. One was Benjamin Rush, the other one was Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Rush said, Plain Truth. How about Common Sense? So that's how the title came to be. But whatever you do, the net is historians now know that this document, this pamphlet of 46, 47, 48 pages that was published on either January 9th or January 10th by Bell, who got fired after a couple editions because he wanted to sell it for 2 shillings and Paine only wanted to sell it for 1 shilling because he wanted it more accessible to more people. Yeah. Okay, fine. But this is what rocks them and socks them, the content, the argument. It's written in 4 parts. And if you read it today, and I really encourage you to read it today, it's an acquired taste. You're going to go, this is written strangely. This is not the way I'm used to reading. And that's for 2 reasons. One is the typography that I looked at of the original from way back when. The letter S looks like an F. they used fonts that we don't use anymore, and so it sort of takes you a while to say, okay, I see what that word is. All right. It was interesting. It was a speed bump to me at the time, but what it meant is I had to slow down and figure out what he was saying. And so it turns out speed bumps are not all a bad thing. But basically, he, in part one, didn't start with where we were at. You know, Lexington conquered? No. That doesn't turn up until part three. He started even before that and said, this whole concept of government, what? The concept of government, you're going to start there? Yeah, he started at the foundations. He said government is a necessary evil. Well, that's pretty radical. Although I bet there's a lot of people in this room who probably share that radical thought, but we won't go there. What he said was society is the good thing. Government is the necessary evil, and somehow or other we have to make sure that the government is doing what society wants. And then he came to this absolutely mind-blowing argument that said, I'm not going to just attack the king for what he did with the taxes. This isn't about tea in the harbor. He said the whole concept of monarchy is against God's will. And he cites the books of Judges and Samuel to talk about the evils of having a king. Now, if you can imagine colonial America, where the best-selling book in virtually every home was the Bible, that's pretty foundational. And then, he gets around to the topic that we think he wrote about, because he did write about that too, which is, by the way, we shouldn't be a colony of Britain. Who would imagine an island telling a continent how to do things? Oh, yeah. And by the way, this whole notion of the king as our father, well, when was the last time your father started shooting people? Okay? And then in part 4, he tackles we're practical. Why? Well, we still are. Can we win this thing? And he starts making arguments about, well, we got all the trees that we need to make a navy. So if you think we can't do this because England's got the biggest navy, we can build ships. And money, well, if you don't take all the money out of here and send it over to England, and we can actually trade with any country we want to, we have the economic foundation to build our own nation. And that is why this little 46, 47, 48-page document published on the 9th or 10th of January rocks the world. Now, he also has a flair for words. And a lot of other people had talked about independence, but they were considered marginal. What Paine did was throw emotion into his argument. And I know today we're all used to seeing ads that are supposed to bring emotion, and therefore you're supposed to go buy your whatever it was because it brought a tear to your heart. Well, Paine makes the case that, by the way, they've killed people up in Boston. There are people who are dead. And whether you're talking about the Boston Massacre, or you're talking about Battle of Lexington and Concord, or it turns out at this point he could also be talking about the Battle of Bunker Hill, which actually was fought on Breed's Hill, but don't get me started. But he basically says all of this argues that even if we could have come to some compromise before the bloodshed, now it's time to part. And that little phrase, it's time to part, gets echoed again and again and again throughout the colonies. Now, net. Basically, he has this absolutely crazy statement. In America, the law is king. Tom Paine, 250 years ago, give or take 24 hours. Wow. That's why we're talking about him today. And by the way, government where authority rests not on a single person. Hear any echoes? Yeah. Within a constitutional framework, that's how it should work. It hadn't worked that way up to then. This was a whole new idea. Well, that idea, I hate to even use this word, went viral. I know. I was taught viral was a bad thing. You didn't want to catch it. But now it's become a good thing. It's another one of those just flukes of history where words change their meaning. Okay, fine. But bottom line, Paine said, if you read the New York Times today, 150,000 copies sold in the first 3 months. And we think he may have been exaggerating, possibly. But it turns out there were no records. So the conservative historians have said at least 120,000. So that number is disputed, but however you want to, 120, 150,000, whatever it was, if you compare that to today, back then there were 2.5 million people in the 13 colonies. Today there's 334 million people in the United States. Do the math. 16.4 million copies in 3 months. That's basically bigger than a bread box. Now, all that's happening down in Philadelphia. But guess what? It's rippling out. And part of the reason it ripples out is because there are newspapers like what was then called the Connecticut Current, which is now known as the Hartford Current, so it's been around for a while, decides this is such news, we're going to just publish the whole thing so that our readers know what everyone's talking about. So that doesn't count as 120,000 copies, but there's a lot of people who were reading the Current. But it also is spread orally. And we know it was spread orally because even George Washington, we do have this documented evidence, writes, wow, this is working a powerful change in the minds of many men in my camp here in Boston. Well, okay, if it's being read to the soldiers in Boston, who maybe from Acton might have been there? Now, I contacted some folks from the Acton Minutemen who are here, and I contacted folks from the Acton Historical Society who are here, and from Ironwork Farm who are here. And I said, okay, who are the most likely people to have read it? We don't have any documentary evidence. I have no proof that I can show you that this is how Acton soldiers encamped around Boston heard common sense. But the consensus view, and we could be wrong, we could be right, again, that's sort of the nature of history, is, well, it's probably Colonel Francis Falukner. Because he's high enough up in the command that this kind of political document is the kind of thing that needed that kind of level of approval before you start reading it to your, although there's other alternative scenarios. And I encourage all of you to rush out, look through your attics. If you can find the letter that said, oh yeah, Captain so-and-so read this, we'd love to know it. But we do know that some people, like the brother of Isaac Davis, were encamped in what is called Dorchester Heights. And you all know about the Knox Trail and bringing the 50 cannon from Fort Ticonderoga. Well, late one night, they suddenly put the cannon up on Dorchester Heights, and the British go, oh my God, they've got cannon on the heights, that's it, we're out of here. And the British, about a week later, on what is called Evacuation Day, we sometimes call it St. Patrick's Day, It's a holiday in Massachusetts. We're supposed to get it off. The British leave. And everyone is amazed that a bunch of ragtag rebels could A, drag the cannon all the way from Ticonderoga, but B, put them up on Dorchester Heights literally overnight. The British say, it would take us 2 months to have pulled that off. Just the overnight part. They wouldn't have imagined dragging the cannons there. So that's some of the evidence that we have. The other evidence we have is right here in this library, which is why this is the right place to celebrate the 250th anniversary. It's actually in our archives. And now it's not like I was at Jones Tavern when I heard this remarkable pamphlet being read aloud. Boy, I wish we could find that one. Now, it turns out we had a town meeting. We had a town meeting on June 14th, 1776, which is not quite 3 weeks before the guys in Philadelphia got around to voting for a declaration. We voted almost 3 weeks earlier to tell our delegate, we want you to vote for independence, and oh, by the way, we want a republic, and oh, by the way, this isn't rhetoric, we're going to back it up, either with our lives or our wealth. Town meeting, I know, I've been to a lot of town meetings. We vote for a lot of stuff. I don't recall us ever putting that on the line, but I can be corrected if you want, that's okay. And we were there ahead of the curve, okay? Yeah. We should be proud of what we did on the 19th of April of 1775, but I'm going to argue that we should be pretty proud of what we did on June 14th, 1776. Now, I am not here to turn Tom Paine into a saint, or, everything he said is inscribed for posterity. We should all follow to the letter of what he said 250 years ago, give or take 24 hours. But what's interesting is the guy who disagreed with him, another Massachusetts native, basically at one point decided to run a pamphlet. He published this in a pamphlet to try to quibble with Paine, and his pamphlet was so unsuccessful that Adams basically backed off and said, fine, for the purposes of the revolution and for the purposes of independence, I agree with you on 3 out of 4 of your arguments. Cool. The only thing I'm not quite sure of is you think the people should just elect someone directly and we need a weak executive. I think we need checks and balances, but that's an argument for another day. And that did become an argument for another day. So, we have a lot of historians who take a look at common sense. And I don't know if you've heard the expression, journalism is the rough first draft of history. Well, I like to think that common sense was the rough first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Why? Well, all people are equal at creation, says Paine. All men are created equal, says Jefferson. Okay, all right. That's unique. We're not claiming that this is plagiarism. Government can be overthrown if it fails to protect rights. It is the right of people to alter or abolish. Wow, what concept? The law is king? Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Yeah. Whatever they were talking about at Jones Tavern, whatever they were hearing outside the encampment during the siege of Boston, whatever they were voting on at Acton Town Meeting, there was an idea. There was a concept. It was set free. And we've heard its echo even just 3 months ago. I was sent by the Acton Exchange, and 2 of my editors are here. And one of the things that my editors like me to do is to say, look, if you're going to cover something like that, we better get it accurate. And it's like, that's fine. And so one of the things that I reported was about 600 people turned out. And of course, I got quizzed. How do you know it was about 600? It's a good question. Estimating crowd size, really fraught with political risk. So I went to a member of the finance committee that day who was in the protest, not me, a colleague. And I said, how do you estimate the crowd? What do you think? He said, more than 500. And I went to a member of the select board. And I said, what do you estimate the crowd at? He said, about 600. And I went to a member of the school committee and I said, what do you think about the crowd's turnout? He said, oh, close to 700. Now, some of you will see a pattern of finance committee, select board. Pay no attention to that, because what I did was basically say, I'm going to report about 600. Why? Because sometimes the best you can do is triangulate. You can estimate. And instead of estimating on one side or the other, we'll estimate in the middle. Secondly, you'll see some quotes. One is from our state rep. Actually, Acton has 2 state reps that's sort of divided at about Route 2. But one of the state reps from south of Route 2 says, history tells us this is no land, for he would be king. And the state representative for north of, is it the other way around? You know, see, that's why, that's why we do this. This is good. This isn't the first time we've overthrown a king. Let's mobilize, organize, and agitate. And when my editor said, well, those are good quotes, that's fine. How do you know? I said, because when they were done speaking, I asked them for a copy of their remarks, and they didn't email them to me later. They handed me their remarks. Would you like to read them? They're here. Okay? So again, journalism tries to do its first draft correctly. 250 years from now, hopefully somebody will look at this presentation and say, well, at least he tried to check some of the facts, except he got some wrong. But guess what? This is a topic that is topical. This is not history. This is 250 years later. We are still discussing it. A good friend of mine, Jim Snyder Grant, basically said, community building is a fundamentally anti-authoritarian action. And I told Jim, by the way, I want to quote you in this presentation. Is that okay? And he said, well, I'm not coming. But yeah, you can quote me. So take that as the mixed endorsement that it is. But the point is that's what the debate is. That's why this is topical. And final point, things don't end. We like to think that they end. History tells you, oh, the war ended and then we created a constitution, right? Maybe. We started something. We are still doing it. And in keeping with that, we started something and are still doing it. One of the funny things that happened as I was preparing this presentation, and I'm going to try to get out of this. Okay. And get to something else. I got contacted by Jerry. You want to wave? And Jerry and I had never met each other before about, 10 days ago, 11 days ago, whatever.
Well, 10, 11, or 12. So
You know how that goes. But he said, I hear you're going to be talking on this topic. He said, I got this interesting proposal to run by you. And I went, yeah, sure, fine. I was worried that I wouldn't get 23 people, and I've already lost that bet. But I said, fine, so what do you got? He said, well, I'm going to ask a really interesting question. If Tom Paine were to write Common Sense in 2026, what would it say? Wow, okay, that's interesting. And he said, by the way, I don't think it's going to be a pamphlet, because we don't do pamphlets anymore, right? It would probably be a video. And he said, I got a video. I'd like to show you what it might look like.
So what if you could take that lightning in a bottle moment that sparked the American Revolution and somehow do it again today? Well, that is the huge idea we're diving into. We're looking at a modern project that's literally dusting off Thomas Paine's 1776 playbook to see if a revolutionary idea can still go viral in 2026. Okay, so this whole story kicks off right here, on a street in Philadelphia. The man you see is visiting family, walking around, and he happens to find himself standing right in front of this historical marker for Thomas Paine's legendary pamphlet, Common Sense. And standing there, this question just hits him, a question he later puts in an email that kicks this whole thing off. He thought, instead of a 46-page pamphlet, what if it was a video? Could a video dropped on social media have the same kind of earth-shattering impact? It's a heck of a question, and it's exactly what we're going to unpack. All right, so to really get what they're trying to do in 2026, we have to go back. I mean, way back. We need to look at the original blueprint, the OG source of inspiration, Thomas Paine's masterpiece. You know, the whole point of Common Sense was how simple and direct it was. Paine wasn't writing for the fancy elites or the academics. Nope, he used plain, powerful language that was aimed right at the average person on the street. And his goal was radical, convince them that breaking away from Britain wasn't just a good idea, it was the only moral choice. And the arguments he made, oh man, they were absolute firebombs for the time. The modern document, which has the codename Project Fergus, lays out its goal just as plainly as Paine did. It's designed to persuade ordinary American citizens to reverse the power grab by the Trump administration. So right off the bat, you can see it has a very specific, very pointed political goal.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, because the proposal doesn't just borrow the title Common Sense. No, it actually tries to create a direct modern-day parallel for each one of Paine's original arguments. So let's do this. Let's break them down side by side.
Okay, so think about this. Paine's real genius move was that he didn't just attack a specific king, he attacked the whole idea of a monarchy. The 2026 document tries to do something similar. It frames its main complaint as a modern equivalent, arguing that deliberately undermining the constitutional balance of power is just as fundamentally wrong as having a king with absolute power.
And that theme of illegitimate power continues. Paine argued that Britain was basically just using America for its own economic gain, right? Well, the 2026 draft points to a different kind of grievance. It claims that real power has shifted away from the people we actually elect, Congress, to what it calls unelected forces, specifically mentioning tech billionaires and the media.
The comparison also looks outward, at America's role in the world. Back in 1776, the big danger was being tied to Britain and getting dragged into all of its European wars. The 2026 document draws a parallel here too. It argues that today's geopolitical threats from Russia and China are getting worse specifically because, in its view, the US is abandoning its allies.
And finally, both documents point to what they see as a massive failure in the system of government itself. Paine said the whole British system of checks and balances was a joke because at the end of the day, the king had all the power. The 2026 document makes a similar claim about a systemic breakdown, but it points its finger at a political party, saying it no longer acts as a real check on the president, but more like a rubber stamp.
Okay, so after laying out all of these parallel problems, what's the proposed solution? How does this Common Sense for 2026 plan to actually turn all these arguments into real-world action?
Well, the plan it outlines is a pretty clear political strategy. Step 1. Find 5 key issues that both mainstream Democrats and Republicans can actually agree on. Step 2. Use those issues to build a centrist coalition with the specific goal of winning the House in the 2026 midterm elections. And Step 3. Use that as a launch pad to present a detailed alternative to other political movements.
And this brings us right back to where we started this whole conversation, to a 500-word digital article that's designed to go viral in a matter of hours on social media. Which leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? In any era, what is it that really gives an idea the power to change the world? Is it the message itself, or is it the technology that delivers it? Is it the brilliance of the argument, or just the perfect timing? It's something to think about, for sure.
So I want to end with the timing question because I think it's one of the pieces that if you read 46 pages, the historian who wrote it makes a good point. Whether it was the 9th or the 10th actually might be significant. Because it turns out the American colonies got word that the king had turned down the olive branch petition on the 9th. The king had voted for that some months earlier, but it took a while back then for news to travel. And the colonies were just learning, oh, compromise isn't an option. Oh, this pamphlet turns up. So one of the things that I hope we can discuss is that, maybe it's the message, maybe it's the medium, or maybe things happen in a pattern. And that's what prompts us to go from, that's an interesting idea, to, oh, that's a weird idea, to, you know what? Some of the people who said they were planning to be here today emailed me this morning and said, sorry, Greg, as much as I would like to be here, I'm not coming because I'm going to a protest. And how do you make the argument against that? So thank you for not going to the protest.
We already went.
Oh, you went. Can you tell us what was the turnout?
It was 550.
Ah! Not 551? Yeah. Okay. So with that, we have a lot of interesting people in the room. We have a microphone, which I'm willing to pass around. Any questions, any comments? Yeah.
This was actually incidental to what you said, but at the beginning you said that Roberts published something about common sense, where Roberts has been working for this unitary executive for however many years and has made one person above the law, not 100%, but about 99%.
Yeah.
Can you explain how he read that and came to that conclusion?
Delusion.
Well, I can share the document because when I saw it, it surprised me.
Where was it published?
Believe it or not, on the SCOTUS blog, but coming from initially Roberts himself, who writes at the end of every year, here's the state of the judiciary. And the document is about 6 pages long, and the first 3 pages are Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And how it then led to the creation of the judiciary and how some of the people in Congress who had voted for the Declaration of Independence then went on to become the early judges on the Supreme Court. And that's how he segues into, oh, by the way, lately we've been doing stuff. So I'd be happy to share it with anyone. You can read it yourself. Yeah, I found it, the timing was ironic, but let's put it this way. There's a lot of people who have a stake in what is called the 250th anniversary. And it's worth discussing, it's worth debating, and there's no one side that owns it. Yeah.
So this is Kim Castens. My question was, how did your students in Edinburgh react to the idea of common sense, since they live under a monarchy, but they have a complicated relationship with the monarchy? Okay,
first of all, they weren't my students, they were my classmates. Okay. Secondly, I was one of two colonials in the class. So the other one was from what was then called Rhodesia, is now Zimbabwe. And it turned out America, or the US, was the first colony to break away, and Rhodesia was the last. So one of the things that you learn studying comparative colonial history is we're not the only ones in the world who have broken away. And the dynamic has been different in different places. Okay, so that was one thing. How my students took it. Well, my classmates basically said, we've always thought Americans were revolting. And this proves it. And they debated whether it was an American Revolution or an American revolt because they thought the middle class was still running the country, therefore, in a class-based prism, we'd broken away, but there was no revolution, not the way France had a revolution. So it was a whole different discussion for a whole different time, but let me then put this in another context. 1969 was during the Vietnam War. The president at that time was a fellow named Richard Nixon. One of the other classes that I went to, which was a political science course, basically my professor there, every time I walked through the door to go sit in a seat, basically said, how did the bombing in Cambodia go this morning? Okay, and I learned what the term bloody Yank meant because that's what my classmates thought of me. But there were a few other Americans at the University of Edinburgh at that time, not many, but a few. Most of them were Quaker. And I find it fascinating that Tom Paine was a Quaker. And after the Kent State shootings, we decided that we had to do something. And you know what we did? We had a read-in. And I read a poem by Carl Sandburg. Oh, take that. So yeah, I was learning to protest. I was still, whatever. And I'm getting the sign from the family gallery here too. Yes.
So I'm thinking the pamphlet, you know, we think of pamphlets now as kind of three-fold pieces of paper or whatever. There's 46, 47, 8 pages. So it's an environment where pamphlets, this wasn't the first pamphlet, it was a pamphlet that was very successful. It came dropped into where conditions existed, where it would be a bestseller. So I'm just curious because there may have been other pamphlets or thinking that influenced Paine. But I don't know because of where our chronology is here.
Oh, great question. And the answer is there were pamphlets in America, and they were duds. Partly because most of the authors were writing for other lawyers. And Paine had been influenced by a different set of pamphlet writers in England. And so one of the interesting things that's in today's New York Times article, which I strongly recommend that everyone rush off and read, is the next phase of investigation, and a book is coming on this topic, is which English pamphlet writers influenced Paine's writing that he then brought to Philadelphia, and they hadn't seen that kind of writing before. So yeah, there were influences, but you won't find them on this side of the pond.
I don't know if you know the answer to this. If my math was right, which I'm getting so that my math isn't so good, but there was one pamphlet for every 20 Americans. What percentage of the population could even read?
Great question. Great question. The answer is, that's why I think the word of mouth part of this was so important. Because what Paine was writing, and again, I told you it's a sort of a quirky style. It's almost, if any of you have read Jack Kerouac, it's that kind of like stream of consciousness kind of thing. but it works well in a tavern. And it works well if you're standing on a stool shouting. And I think that's then how the message carried. It was also read, by the way, from pulpits. There were ministers who read this. And again, part of the reason why we speculate on Lieutenant Colonel Francis Falukner is because if it is read around the campfire at a camp, you don't have to be literate to hear what's going on. Now, Paine went on to write other stuff, one of which is called The American Crisis, which was so powerful we still quote it. These are the times that try men's souls. That's Paine. He wrote it in Valley Forge, and Washington understood the power of that pamphlet, had it read to his troops before they crossed the Delaware. So part of the reason why he was not just a one-hit wonder. This is a guy who kept going. There was another question here. Yes.
What's the story on the video? I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, that's
No, the one you showed.
Yeah, well, would you like to?
Make it available to anybody who would like it. I can make it available to anyone who would like it. I can email it. You actually showed a almost final version, but that's okay.
It's close enough.
Yes.
It was like the 9th and the 10th.
So I have it. I also have the document that I wrote that I sent to Greg. And truth be told, Greg used an AI tool to generate the first 3 versions of the video. And I then took that and sent it to a professional videographer that I used before I retired to come up with this version. So I'm happy to make both the video and the initial document available publicly. Cut or loose.
Oh, Jerry Skurla. Jerry, you're going to have to. How do they get to you?
Is anybody here going to send black helicopters to my house? Because in that case, I'm Roger Rabbit. Okay. No, my name is Jerry Skurla. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was there over the holidays. Literally bumped into that sign. I didn't bump into it. I wanted to find it because I had just gone to the National Convention Center, which is a new museum across the Little Mall from Independence Hall. And there was a wonderful exhibit there of how the Constitution itself got written. There is a first draft of the Constitution, which was written from Virginia, or submitted by Virginia, in a protected glass case. Okay. They went from May to September, so writing stuff doesn't happen quick. There's a very special spot which shows where Roger Sherman, who was one of the 5 on the Declaration Committee, later from Connecticut, provided the Connecticut Compromise, which led to Congress having 2 houses. One, the House of Representatives, right, measured by population, and the Senate, everybody gets 2. So the timing of all of this is karmic, to say the least. Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? We're actually 5 minutes before 3, so you know what? We actually finished within the hour that we claimed that we would take. But what? Bob has a comment.
Well, 2 is, 1, you'll stick around and talk to some people if they didn't get their questions. No helicopters yet. But there's one other thing you told me about Thomas Paine that blew my mind. What he had to say about the French Revolution, and he had a role there that just.
Yeah. So we'll end on a brief glimpse of what happened later. After the American Revolution, Paine went to France, was there during the French Revolution. Actually, was pretty impressed by the initial phase of it, went and wrote a pamphlet called The Rights of Man to basically encourage the English to support the French Revolution, and the English hated that whole idea, which is why a whole lot of false biographies of him were published around that time, which claimed that he was the son of a stay maker, as in corsets. It turns out his father made stays, but stays are also part of the rigging of ships, but they were trying to make fun of him. Anyway, net was they decided to convict him in absentia because he left and went back to France before they could get him, and was actually elected to the delegates. An American from England is actually serving in the House of Delegates in France during the Revolution. He runs into, of course, political problems with Robespierre and spends a year in the Bastille, which is where his health went to hell in a basket. And part of the reason he went to the Bastille was at that point they were debating, what do we do with the king? And Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, said, do not execute the king. Yeah, that's a piece of history that they don't always cover. And that was enough to get him sent to the Bastille. He was freed about a year later. The American ambassador at the time was a young fellow named Monroe. Yeah. So they got him out of there and they brought him back to the United States. So yeah, if you get into Thomas Paine, there is a lot more to check out. And by the way, this is a great place to do the checking out. Let me just thank the library for letting us occupy this room for an hour, but let me also say this is a great place to do your homework. You'll find a lot more information right here, including the archives of old town documents from the town meeting. Yes?
So what was his rationale for when Thomas Paine said, do not execute the king, what was his rationale? He was a Quaker, so presumably he was against, killing, but did he have a different line of reasoning in addition to that?
Yeah, they'd already deposed the king. They'd already set up a new government. He said, you don't need to kill the king. You've removed him. Mm-hmm. That's enough. And so he, go figure. Go figure. It was he was not saying, let's go kill King George. He was saying, he's a tyrant, we don't want him anymore. We're going to set up an independent government, but it adds a little more nuance to the. It was a revolution, but no, he wasn't into just chopping off heads for the heck of it. Yeah.
One possibility is that he was basically saying, we're against the institution, not against the individual.
By the way, that's why she's my editor. I can write all kinds of stuff. What you don't know, if you read it at the Acton Exchange, is it goes through some really good fact checking, and it goes through you're saying it what that way? So the good news is they make me look good, and my byline may be on it, but at the end of the day, it is a group effort. And I think that's probably a good place to end.